Greetings. It's been a couple of days since I talked about anything. Um, I thought today that I would talk about Spring and AOP, which is kind of a near and dear thing to my heart. And I find that a lot of developers aren't really as familiar with AOP and what it can do. Um, Imagine you have a customer service. So I have a customer service being here defined in Spring, and it implements this interface, and it's just a very simple interface that just has an execute method in it. And it's very simple in what it actually does, but it could be doing something very complicated. But in this particular case, it just says, "Hey, I'm executing my service." I have a little main, method here that basically builds that application context, gets that customer service being out of it, and then calls the execute. Right? Very simple. So now imagine that I want to kind of log, how long things are taking. I want to know like when it goes into the execute, and I want to know when it comes out. Well, Spring allows you to do that by basically using what's called AspectJ, and AspectJ is a framework for writing what's called aspects, and there's lots of sophistication to that. It has its own kind of expression language, but and I'm going to give a brief example or two of what that looks like in a moment. But basically, what you can do is you can define a class called an advisor, and what it will do is it will intercept calls to your target, which in my particular case is the customer service class. So I can do things before the target does its thing. I can execute stuff after the target does its thing. I can do both. I can do something before and after in one method, and I can even actually not go to the target if I decide so. Let me take you into the advisor class, and basically you define an aspect by basically putting this little aspect annotation onto it, and then I have three types of advice here, and as we'll see in a moment, there's some very interesting because I'm doing a before after advice and around advice all together. We're going to get an interesting result from that, but I'll show you that in a minute. And I put in these little sleeps just so you can see that it's not like a thread thing, where you have some threads and they're simultaneously doing things, and so it comes out in a weird order. No, promise you'll see, they execute in order, but it's going to be an interesting order. But I don't want to spoil the fun for you. This line here is called a point cut. So basically, what this is saying is I'm doing some before advice. So I'm explicitly saying before this method gets executed, and as you can see, I'm advising the execute method of the service interface. So before you call through to any class that implements this execute method, do this. So and there's the execution means that there's other terms that you can do. There's other things you can advise, but generally when I use AOP, I mostly am just advising execution into methods, right? So there's that. This little star basically is a way of saying, it's a wild card, obviously, but you can basically put in things like public init, which says I want to advise any method that is public returns an int named execute from this package in this class, whatever, right? And I can say where I want it to be protected, so if the method is protected, it returns an int and is named execute, advise it, or I don't care if it's public or protected or whatever. You know, I can in this case I'm particularly just like that. No, maybe it's just one star. But anyway, I'm just advising everything that's all anything that there was execute. If there was different return types, whatever, who cares? But I can also do this, which is basically saying I want to advise all the methods of service. And now of course, this interface only has one method in it. But if it had more, I could advise them all. And the nice thing about this also is that any class that implements service, will automatically get proxied because I'm I'm basically advising the interface, not a class, right? So automatically I get all of them. But all right, so I'm particularly in this example just advising execute, and before my execute happens, I'm going to basically say, hey, I'm about to execute this service. I have after advice that does a very similar thing. It just does it afterwards. And then I have a round advice, and a round advice is very similar, but it's a little different because you're actually wrapping around the advice. You're completely surrounding the advised object, and so in order to actually execute the method within it, you have to have a way to do that, and it comes through this thing called the preceding join point. So if we look at the preceding join point, methods, there's this one called proceed, which is how you actually say, now go invoke the thing that I'm advising. But you can see you can do other things. You can get the arguments for it, you can get the signature of the method being advised, and that's pretty much the main things you want to do. So you go through, you call it, you get back out some object result, and you return it. That's kind of how a round advice works. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, okay, I'm really about to start. I go and I proceed, which calls the method, and then I come back and it says that's fast, and I just return it. So 3 types of advice. I do something before, I do something afterwards, or I do something before and afterwards. Okay? So now I go and I run this guy. Okay, we're about to start, executing the service. That was fast, done. Right? Okay. So, now there's some interesting things about this. All right, so let's go look at our trace here. So we get our Spring context, we load the bean definitions, and then the first thing that happens is the before and after, which is this round advice. Okay, so the before and after executed first, and then the before advice happened, and that's great. So and then it was executing the service. And then the after advice, the around advice executed again, and then the after advice happened. So wait a second here. What was going on here? The before advice happened inside the around advice, but the after advice happened outside the round advice. Sorry, did I say that wrong? Hold on. The before advice, which is here, the about to execute service, happened inside the before and after, right? The around advice. But the after advice happened after the around advice. Well, here's the thing. When you're going and you're basically, proxying is what you're really doing here, right? So you're basically implementing, an interface, and then that new implementation, does something and then calls through to the real thing, right? Well, what happened here was the innermost proxy around my service class was the before advice, right? Because it gets called right before I actually execute the service. So the before advice is the innermost proxy. The next proxy is the round advice, because it happened here and the before, and then after I came out of it. And then the after advice happens to be the last advice, right? So it came the last, right? So it's basically just an order of how the proxies got applied. And I do believe that it does try to make it so that after advice comes later. So it'll wrap them in a particular order so that basically anything that has before advice will get will execute before anything that is after advice. Just kind of logical that way. So I hope that is pretty clear. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop me a question. I'm happy to answer things about this. Oh, and I'm using IntelliJ, and one of the cool things about IntelliJ is it will find these aspects and it will tell you hey. There's some methods that are advised, and you click on it, and it will take you over to the advised method. And you'll notice if I click on the going back, because it says, hey, there's advice on this method, it actually tells me all the different types of advice, and I can jump to the different ones. So this one tells me it's advised before, it's advised after, and it's advised around. So you can jump to any one of those. So all right, please give me feedback. But subscribe to the, there's a little ninja icon in the bottom right if you're watching this on YouTube, and then there'll be more just coming soon. Thank you very much.